So we're talking about here how to deal with times when our inspiration is waning, and hopefully answering the question not of how do we stay inspired, because we have already conceded that this is humanly impossible, but rather how do we navigate times when we are feeling a little bit depleted or perhaps very depleted in our human experience here. So I'm telling you about my car, my gas tank, my relationship with it. So it gets to that E. Now, the first time that E, indicating empty, showed up, I very dutifully, very obediently went straight to the gas station and filled up. And then I think the next time it happened, when I got to that E, I was busy, as is often the case in my life. And I thought, okay, like just one more errand, and then I will fill up the car with gas. Now, I think the world is probably divided into two kinds of people. Those of you who are listening to this story and thinking, oh, I never let my car get past a quarter, right? Like that's the time to go. And then there are the other people who play like maybe this sort of Russian roulette with that E, like how far can I go now? By the end of the story, you will see which camp I was in and which camp I have since converted to. Guess where this is going. So I started to drive a little bit more, and I noticed that that E wasn't necessarily like a command. It was kind of a little bit more like a suggestion. Maybe I could drive a little bit longer. And so this became my routine. It would get to that E. I would see how much I could squeeze in. Then in a religious fervor, I would pray until I got to the gas station that my car would not run out of gas, and I would be fine. Now, there was one such February evening in Toronto when it was very cold, and I had been driving around for some time with that E, and I knew that I was really pushing it. I knew that I was on the edge, but my time also was tight, and I had to make it to a class I was teaching. So I made a deal with God. I said, okay, listen, I've got to get to this class. I don't have time to go to the gas station. On my way back, I will fill up with gas. So I drive, I park, I get there, I teach, I get back into my car. And now like me and God, we're good. We're going to make it to the gas station. The gas station was maybe 4 blocks from where I was. And I'm driving along. And if you have ever run out of gas, it is a unique experience to be driving along on a cold February night. And the car just sort of starts to go and comes to a complete stop, actually right at the entrance to the subway station, or what you would call this tube station. And in the distance, at the end of the block, I can see the gas station. So I do the only thing that I know to do. It's just I get out of my car and I walk along and I go to the gas station. And then with my most desperate woman voice, I go to the gas station attendant and I explain my predicament because I don't even know what to do now. Like the car's back there, the gas station is here. So he gives me this can, I don't know if anybody has done this, right? And he takes me over and he helps me fill it up. And then I take my can with this spout, not really knowing how it's actually going to get into my car. And I trudge along in the cold February night to my car, and I open up and I sort of figure out how to fill it up with enough gas to now drive to the gas station. Suffice to say, there is also gas on my hands, on my boots, on my coat. I get into my car, I drive, I fill up the rest of the tank, and I drive home. Now, I was definitely left with the smell from the experience, and I was also left with a lesson. Now, what's the relevance for us? Well, first of all, take my warning and don't learn yourself. Don't be a Russian roulette player with your gas tank. I have mostly converted over to the more cautious side. But I think the lesson for all of us and the question that we want to explore tonight is, how do we manage when our metaphorical gas tank is running low? How do we deal with those times when our motivation, our sense of capacity, perhaps connection, even willingness to continue on is running low? And how do we become empowered in this process? So if we look at the world, if we look at nature, at Teva, we see that cycles, highs and lows, are actually mapped into existence, right? We have high tide, we have low tide. We have seasons, we move through cycles, even throughout a day, right? We begin with light, and now we have descended into darkness.
We begin with darkness here.
We begin with darkness, yes, also that. Good point. So, but we move between. But what I think is important to notice is that mapped into the system of the world, of nature, and also in the human being's life course, are highs and lows. Now, does this mean that my talk is over and well, now there we go, there are cycles and you just kind of ride it out and that's it? Well, this would be a short evening if that was the case. So there's an episode in the Torah, which I believe is instructive for us. So what happens is that Abraham, our forefather, has an encounter with the Almighty, with God. Now, Abraham has been promised that he is going to be the father of a great nation. At the same time, his wife, Sarah as she becomes, is barren, has not been able to have children. And in this encounter with God, with the Almighty, God calls to Abraham and tells him to go outside of his tent. And he says to Abraham that he should look up at the stars. And he says, Abraham, if you could count those stars, that's how plentiful your offspring will be. So what does this mean? And what does this have to do with our lives? So Rashi, our go-to commentator in unpacking what the Torah is coming to tell us, says as follows. He says, on the one hand, we could interpret this as God is literally showing him what is going to be possible, what is going to happen in his life. I sort of think of it as, before we had teachers instruction training, before we had visual aids and PowerPoints, that God was the first and the ultimate pedagogue. And he knew Abraham needed a visual aid. He needed to be able to see in a tangible way what was going to happen. Rashi says there's another way to understand this. He says that what God was asking Abraham to do was to literally place himself above the stars. So what does that mean, place oneself above the stars? So you see, Abraham was worried. Abraham had explained to God, listen, on the one hand, you've given me this promise, you've given me this mission, I'm going to be the father of a great nation. On the other hand, here, my wife and I are not so young. We don't have that offspring. What's going to be? When God says to Abraham to go above the stars, what he's hinting at, one of the explanations is that what he's hinting at is as follows. The stars represent mazalot. They represent astrology. They represent a life course and a destiny according to the laws of nature. And yes, Abraham, according to the laws of nature, according to the storyline that you are currently locked into, the picture doesn't look so good. But if you lift yourself above the stars, if you join me, Abraham, if you partner with God, anything is possible. Don't lock yourself into the story that you are living in. Step outside of it and join me, God says. And with me, together, you and I can do anything. So what's the relevance for us? We have our own tents. We have our own storylines. We have the cognitive structures that we erect around ourselves about what we believe is possible for who we are and our lives and our energy and everything that we have to get through and everything we're managing. And that's it, not one more thing and not one more day and not one more lockdown and not what, I can't. And in the same way that God calls to Abraham and says, step outside, I believe the charge, the call for each of us is to step outside of our own tent, to step outside of our self-erected structures and limitations and see what might actually be possible. Where am I limiting myself? Where might there be a possibility when I let God into the picture? So Rebbetzin Simon mentioned that I'm an occupational therapist. I work as a psychotherapist. I like to make things practical. So although we're talking about inspiration, and I like to tell a good story, my mission is tonight to give you practical tools so that the next time, or maybe just like an hour from now, when you are feeling a little less inspired, you can call upon something. You have something tangible, and I have something tangible in my own life to tap into. So tonight I want to share with you 4 strategies, 4 ways that I believe we can do this work. And this is based actually on the work on a piece by Rav Shlomo Wolbe of blessed memory. He was a Musar Gadol, a great sage of self-development. And he actually just passed away in 2005. And this is based on a piece of his called Yemei Ahava, Yemei Sina, Days of Love and Days of Hatred. Now, I want to ask those of you who are with me here in person, when I say that, Days of Love and Days of Hatred, what does this sound like an essay about? Love and hatred. Anyone? Okay, well, I'm going to fill in. I think it sounds like a piece about a relationship. And I think that really is the ultimate paradigm for us to understand in our lives, that all of this, all of the ideas that we are going to share tonight, at the foundation is the notion that a spiritual journey and a life journey is a relationship. It's a relationship with ourselves, with our souls. It's a relationship with God and with each other. And therefore also these tools are very transferable, not only to our spiritual journey and to the waxing and waning around inspiration, but also to relationships. So the first tool that I want to share with you that Rav Wolbe tells us is that it's normal. When we feel less inspired, when we are not in those times when everything is feeling great and we want to do those things, or we are perhaps in love with our project or with ourselves or with our mission, when we don't feel that way, that's normal. And that in and of itself dissolves so much of the pain. So much of the panic we experience is the story we tell ourselves that something is very wrong here. This was not the way it was supposed to go. This was not my plan, and I have to figure out how to fix this and fix it very quickly. But the moment we realize that actually this is all part of the journey, so much of the angst and anguish dissolves. You know, this is a powerful therapeutic technique, right? In therapy, we validate. We use words like, that makes sense. It doesn't mean we agree always with the thought or the feeling, but we say, given what you're experiencing, given where you come from, it makes sense that this is what you are feeling. You know, a lot of the time when people come into therapy, part of our goal setting process involves landing on the same page. And one of the things that I say to people is, you know, so if we were to draw a graph of what you expect therapy to look like, what would you hope, you know, that it might look like? And the graph, as most of us would draw, is often like this beautiful upward slope. And I say, yes, that would be my wish too. Now let's talk reality. It's going to look much more like an up and down trajectory. It's an important discussion to have because we need to land around realistic expectations so that when the growth that we are working on, when the change we are hoping to facilitate has some dips, or we experience what some people call setbacks, rather than alarm bells going off, rather than thinking something is terribly wrong, we are prepared. We know this is part of the journey. Rabbi Akiva Tatz, and in his hometown at the moment, right, shares the mashal, the metaphor based on the Torah of Rav Moshe Shapiro of the landscape that we are walking along, suddenly illuminated by lightning. And he says that lightning, that flash of lightning, when we are walking along and we see everything and it's clear, that's like a free gift. That's when we're first falling in love. That's when we begin the new project, right? That's the beginning of the school year. Everything is great and new, and we get it and we see it and we're there, we land. But what do we know about lightning? It's temporary. And after that flash of lightning, after that clarity, it gets dark. And what do we often do? We panic. We think just because we can't see around us anymore, the tundra or the landscape doesn't exist. No, it hasn't disappeared. What do we need to do? Now we need to spend a lifetime walking through that darkness, earning the light, gathering the light ourselves. That lightning, it was a free gift. It was a hint at what is possible. Now we do the hard work. And this is the work really of understanding that those moments of darkness, those moments when we feel perhaps less clear or less connected, are part of the journey. They're not antithetical to growth. They're not something that is telling us we're not going to be inspired. They are part of the experience itself. So we're normalizing, right? We're validating for ourselves. This is okay. Nothing is terribly wrong. Life is an up and down journey. And one of my heroes, one of my role models in the Torah is Yosef. So Yosef is the man of the up and down life. And actually, if we look at the storyline of his life, there is a lot of physical up and down. He's born to Yaakov, to Jacob. He is Jacob's beloved, favorite son. And he enjoys this beautiful, really, stature in his father's eyes and in the family system at home. Any family systems therapists out there, we can discuss this later, all the other pieces. And because of the role he plays in his family and his brother's jealousy of him, they literally put him in a pit, and he has his first descent. Now, as he's in that pit, a caravan comes by of Ishmaelim, and his brothers decide to sell him. So he is physically brought up from the pit, and he's brought to Mitzrayim, to Egypt, where he begins to live in the house of Potiphar and actually advances and climbs further up. Now, Potiphar's wife, Eshet Potiphar, takes a fancy to Yosef, and makes advances towards him. And when he resists, she accuses him of having nevertheless been inappropriate with him, and now he is thrown into jail. Right? He has the next descent. When he is in jail, he is an interpreter of dreams. Right? The cupbearer is released, whose dream he has interpreted. The cupbearer shares this with Pharaoh, who calls upon Yosef. Yosef accurately interprets his dreams, and he is released from prison, and he becomes the right-hand man to Pharaoh. Why am I sharing this with you? Yosef's life not only has an up and down trajectory. Throughout the Torah, throughout his life, he is referred to as Ish Elokim, which we translate as man of God. But significantly, we know that we have many names that we use to refer to God. The name Elokim refers to God as God is concealed in nature, is hidden in the divine design. What is this telling us about Yosef? His life is up and down, but throughout his life, whatever was happening, he was connected to a God consciousness. God might not have been revealed, but he always felt the Almighty with him. And I believe if the first strategy for us is to normalize those times when the gas tank is running low, the clue to not just using a therapeutic tool, but a spiritual tool, is to acknowledge not only that this makes sense and this happens and that this is okay, but to understand that the Almighty has not left us to deal with this alone, and that this is a normal aspect of being a soul living in a human body. So what might this look like in a very practical way? I think a lot of it has to do with how we talk to ourselves. A lot of it has to do with our internal script and the thoughts that we water, that we nurture when we are feeling this way, and really becoming very intentional about the story we're telling ourselves. To even say like, wow, this makes sense. This is okay. This is part of where I'm meant to be. So that's number one, normalizing. Number two, hold on. Okay, what do I mean? Oftentimes we will take on a project. We will decide to take on a behavior, perhaps a mitzvah we want to grow in, and we're full of energy, vim and vigor and inspiration. And then after a few weeks, if you're doing really well, maybe after a few months, life starts to get in the way. We're tired. We have other obligations. We just don't feel it anymore. And we think, who was I kidding? Is this really for me? I don't think so. And we drop the whole thing. We get into very much an all or nothing mentality. And in that context, it makes a lot of sense to us, right? We think, well, maybe I should choose like a new goal or a new project, a new thing. Now's not the time. But if I go back to my car story, we can see how this is absurd, right? Like if my car had run out of gas and I had stopped and been like, well, I guess driving car is not for me, and just walked the rest of the way home and abandoned my car, how bizarre. Or we look at young children, right? Learning to walk, right? The ultimate example for us. If they got up, fell down once, twice, or three times and thought like, clearly this walking thing is not for me, we would all be here like scooting around, right? Or crawling still. We know that our capacity to hold onto a project is there. The problem is that we think we have to hold on to the whole thing. And what I want to say to you is when I say hold on, it doesn't have to be the whole project. Rav Wolbe says, you know, if you were learning an hour a day and you're not feeling it, so can you do 10 minutes a day? Don't drop the project completely. And at a neurological level, this is very important. When we take on a behavior, we burn neural pathways, right? We develop behavioral patterns, and those pathways in our brain, those neural connections become stronger and stronger the more we do something. And if we don't use it, we lose it. When we feel less capable, when we feel less inspired, it might be tempting to give up completely. But if we want to keep those pathways there, if we want to keep the possibility for returning to the project open, we need to keep going, if even just a little bit. When we were in Mitzrayim, when we were in Egypt, the Midrash tells us that there were 3 things that we held on to. And that was because of those 3 things that we were not completely swallowed into Egyptian culture. What were they? Our names, our clothing, and our language. What's significant about these? So our names, many of you here, if I were to ask you, what's your name? Maybe your name's after somebody. Maybe there's a story about why your parents chose your name. Our name carries a piece of our history. Our names tell us where we came from. Clothing. So as long as we're not dressed completely like other people, we can't completely blend in. As long as we're a little bit different, we cannot totally assimilate. As long as we're dressed in our own way, we don't blend into the crowd. Something about who we are and where we came from is maintained. And language, well, what do we use language for? We use language to encode our experiences. We use language to talk to ourselves, to explain our reality to ourselves, and to talk to the people around us. Language shapes how we interpret our experiences. We're told that as a people, we had sunk to the 49th level of tumas, the 49th level of impurity, of disconnection. We were that close to losing all of it. And yet these 3 things we held on. The Midrash doesn't say, and we held on to everything and we were completely observant. And no, the Midrash says there were a few key things that we held on to. I had a student who recently was talking to me about, a struggle she was having in her commitment to prayer. And so we used this strategy, right? We normalized it, we validated, and then we said, okay, so how could you hold on? How can we make the project smaller? How can we make it bite-sized? What way could we be creative? If you were spending 10 minutes a day praying, like what would 1 minute a day look like? What would the key pieces be? Or maybe you don't want to be using anything structured right now. What would it look like to make sure you were speaking to God in your own words, right? What is a way to hold on without giving up completely? I read a story about a family who had lived in a bustling Jewish community, and then they moved to a small town in Southern America. And when they moved to that town, the Jewish population went from 0 to 4. And every Shabbat, every Shabbos, they would set the table for 5. Mom, dad, 2 kids, and an empty chair and plate. And for years they did this. Why? They didn't have Shabbos guests. Because they knew someday they would move somewhere where there would be people to invite. Or someday other people would move there. And as long as they had a spot at the table, they were holding on. They would be ready. I have a friend who is training to be a yoga teacher, and part of the training, it was to do a yoga practice every day. And she said to me, there are some days that she was just so tired, like she didn't feel like doing yoga at all. And so she spoke to the instructor. She said, what am I supposed to do? And the instructor said, unroll the mat every day. That's your yoga practice some days. If you want, sit on the mat. Hold on, you don't have to do the whole practice. Keep a little bit of it. So our first strategy was to normalize, to validate that self-talk. The second strategy that I want to share with you is to hold on, if not to the whole thing, to a piece. Because when we're feeling weighed down, when we're feeling depleted, if we try to do the whole project, we're actually setting ourselves often up for failure. But if we can find a micro action, right? Just if we had been giving a large amount to tzedakah, to charity, perhaps we give a small amount. Right? If we had been, hosting in a big way or helping somebody out a lot, and we're having that feeling, I just can't, I don't have the energy. Can you just smile to someone, right? But make it intentional, right? Not, oh yeah, maybe that thing, right? To think it through, what is a small way that I can hold on? So those are our two strategies. Our third strategy, using our intellect, using, as Rav Wolbe says, our seichel. What do we mean? We need to develop clarity about where we want to go. If you've ever had a hard time making a decision, and then you lean back and you ask yourself, well, what do I really want? Right? Like, what is this decision about? Not like, should I go out to dinner tonight or not? Should I go here or there? But like, what is my core value in my life in this moment? Right? What am I about? Where do I ultimately want to go? Then the answer of how we should act often becomes very easy and very clear, because when we're clear about our values, when we're clear about where we want to go, then the steps that get us there become much less fraught, much less anxiety filled. So we need to do some work at an intellectual level to understand for ourselves, where is it that we want to be going? What do I really want to be building for myself and in my life, in my spiritual work, in my soul journey? And anyone who's familiar with how they train in the IDF probably knows that part of the training are long, grueling hikes, carrying stretchers with weights on them that mimic what it would be like to be in battle. And I was speaking with a young man a couple of years ago who had trained in the IDF recently, and he was telling me, about this hike that they do, and it's one of the big hikes in basic training. And he said, they do this hike and it is hot and they are tired and their feet are killing and they are almost collapsing. And it's right at that moment when they think they're done and they're about to put the stretcher down that their commander says, a little bit more. Why? To show them that just at the moment when they think, I have nothing left in me. You think that gas tank is empty? No koach, no energy. Just at that moment, that if they choose, if they use their intellect, or as they say in the IDF, hakol barosh, all is in the head. If we use our mind, we can push ourselves. We can do a little bit more. That so much is about where our mind is at. And that's actually why in therapy, it's very important for me when I'm working with a client to clearly set goals together. Because it's very easy to get lost, to digress, and sometimes it's necessary, right? Things come up in life. But we both need to have sort of on paper together, a shared understanding about where we're hoping to go together. Because things will come up and we will lose sight of where we are. And we both need to be able to go back and say, okay, look at this. Like, is this still our goal? Do you want to change that goal? No, this is where we want to go. Okay, like, let's hold on to this. Let's not get lost in the moment, in the muck and guck and chaos and crisis, but let's keep our eye trained on that goal. Let's come back together to the deeper purpose here, to the higher aspiration. Viktor Frankel, famously a survivor of the Holocaust, of the camps, as well as having been a neurologist before the war, wrote a book, probably many of you are familiar with it, Man's Search for Meaning. And there he writes about how he studied the inmates around him through his experience. And what he found was the game-changing feature between those who were able to survive and those who did not, were those who had meaning. As he says, if you have a why, you can bear almost any almost any circumstance. When in our mind, we know what we are about and where we want to go, almost any circumstance, almost any struggle can be endured. And this is where, when we have set our eyes on a project, when we are trying to grow, when we are trying to build, whether it's our own spiritual lives, whether it's our homes, our marriages, our communities, our children, having an idea, having clarity about where we want to go is not just like a nice thing, right? It's not like the cherry on top and this really nice story that I'm sharing with you, but I really believe it is the thing that can save our lives. We spoke about Yosef, we spoke about Joseph's life, and we said that Eshet Potiphar, Potiphar's wife, makes these advances towards him. And we have to think, what it must have been like for him. I'm here, I was talking with I guess I would call her my grandmother-in-law, my mother-in-law's mother, about what it's like to be here, and that I've certainly spoken to my family since we've been visiting London, and how even in the short amount of time between my visit to London and their immigration here from South Africa, what it's like to be able to communicate with family has been revolutionized, right? And in my lifetime, I remember when I went to Israel, what it was like to make a phone call from a payphone back home. And now, we're on WhatsApp all day long. When Yosef goes down to Mitzrayim, there's no WhatsApp. There are no letters back home. He is not in touch. He is a young, vulnerable man in the house of Potiphar. And even if he is not interested in transgressing with Eshet Potiphar, with Potiphar's wife, you have to certainly, I think, in our minds, think with fresh eyes of what it must have been like to be this young boy so far away from home, with no affection, with no support. And we're told that there was a moment of trembling, that there was perhaps a moment of, maybe I'm going to be tempted. And the Gemara says what stopped him was that he saw the face of his father, that he saw Jacob's likeness, and that stopped him. Why? Because he saw, I'm Jacob's son. This is where I come from. This is who I am. This is who I can be. He had that intellectual clarity about himself, and therefore was able to stand up to that test. I think about a story that my Bubi used to tell us. My Bubi of blessed memory was a Holocaust survivor from Lodz, Poland. And she grew up in a Ger Hasidish family. And her mother passed away when my Bubi was a young girl. She was raised by her father. She was the youngest of 6 children, and they were Ger Hasidim. And she talks about how her father dressed. She said, in the full Hasidish lavush with a high spodek. And she and her sister liked to go out to the coffee houses in Lodz. They were interested in poetry and the culture. And she said, when I would go out, he would never say a judgmental word. He never said anything about where I was going, but he would sit at the table and he would look at us and he would say, wherever you go, whatever you do, always remember you're Eliyahu Bergman's tochters, you're Eliyahu Bergman's daughters. And that sense of whose daughter she was didn't just carry her through those years. It was the strength that she had inside of her to know whose daughter she was, that enabled her to endure the war, losing her father in the ghetto, coming to Canada, to a new country where, as she would say, she didn't have a word of English or a penny in her pocket. She always knew she was Eliyahu Bergman's tochter. So our first 3 tools: first, to normalize, to validate that self-talk. Second, hold on, even if just to a little piece, don't drop the whole project. And third is to have that intellectual clarity. So maybe it's about writing down, the goal or the value, or maybe it's about finding a role model, right? Like Yosef had Yaakov, like Joseph had Jacob, like my Bubi had her father, to have somebody who believes in you, to have that person in your mind. How would I want to behave in front of them? Who do I want to be? Who do they know I could become? And to cultivate that sense inside of ourselves. The fourth and last strategy is to understand that when it comes to human nature, when it comes to our own growth and our own lives, that as human beings, we enjoy novelty. We like things that are new. I sort of think about this as the perfume effect. You walk into a room, you smell a scent, right? You spend half an hour there, you probably don't smell it anymore. When something is new, we're attuned to it and we enjoy it. We like new things. I don't know if anybody here, oh, I guess maybe London is a little bit like a place where there aren't seasons, but there are seasons here. I know people who live in these like hot places where there are no seasons. I hear people say things like, I wouldn't want to live there. I like the seasons too much. I don't know. I could be tested. Let me say, I could be tested to live in a warm climate. But, there is something very special about each season, each newness. And in the Jewish calendar, we see this. We have mitzvahs every day that are available to us. Every day of the year, there are multiple ways that we can connect to God, where we can feel elevated and enlightened. And yet, the one time a year mitzvahs, eating our matzah, building our sukkah, we become super passionate about, right? Much harder to be passionate about the things that we do every single day. Marketers understand this. I don't know if you've had this experience. You go to the store, you look on the shelf, you're looking, I don't know, like maybe for your cereal, you're looking for that familiar box. And then all of a sudden you see this box and like, it looks totally different, but there's this little bubble on the side. So, same product, new packaging, right? So, and I always have, you can tell a little bit about me and my relationship to change. I'm always like, I miss the old cereal box. I just want it the way it was. But what marketers know is that novelty and newness brings pleasure for us. And in our spiritual journey, in working on ourselves and dealing with these low gas tank moments, this is a vital thing to be attuned to. Because if we're trying to just do the same thing over and over and still feel as excited about it, it's going to be very hard. And especially when we are perhaps feeling a little bit depleted, if we just do what we always did, we might not have success. But if we change it up a little bit, if we find a way to bring freshness to it, we can also reignite some of that passion. So what might that look like? So if we're talking about, we were talking about prayer, right? So do you maybe buy a new siddur, a new prayer book? Do you learn something new about it? A project that I took on, I called it like my own Shabbat project, was that I tried to make Shabbos in our home more exciting, right? So I got a whiteboard and I wrote the candle lighting times there, and we would do different themes on the table, and I tried to do new dishes, and just how can we make this more of an event? How can I also for myself, right, make my own anticipation, the work that goes into doing this for my family, how can I take more pleasure in it, right? How can I enjoy the presentation more? Whatever it is, I know that definitely when it comes to work in relationships, that we say that routine is the enemy of relationship. Right? As soon as it becomes rote, as soon as it all feels like, I've done that, bored. So what we do is to work with ourselves, to work with people, is to find ways to just even have fresh eyes, right? It definitely helps to come to a new place where I'm looking at every which way to cross the street, right? And I mistake people for drivers. But novelty is vital as well in our spiritual journey, and in managing, in shortening these periods of disconnection, in shortening these experiences of lowered inspiration, and lengthening the times that we are feeling motivated and connected, and as our Volby would say, in those places of love. So I gave us 4 tools tonight. The first, validate, normalize. That's the self-talk. The second, hold on, not to the whole thing, right? Remember the Midrash, the Jews in Egypt didn't have the whole picture going on, but 3 key things. Right? What can we hold on to? What way to look like in our lives to unroll that yoga mat when we don't have the energy to do the whole thing? A little bit. Number 3, our intellect, that piece of seichel, our clarity. What are my goals? What are my values? Where do I want to go? Where do I come from? Who's my role model? What am I going to carry with me? And the 4th, novelty. How can I, as my booby used to say, freshen up, right? When a new season would come, she would get like a new scarf or a new sweater. She used to say, to freshen up the wardrobe, right? How can we freshen up our spiritual wardrobe? And how can we bring a little bit more of that energy to our lives? So those are our 4 tools, our 4 strategies. I want to leave you with a story or perhaps an image, and then open it up to those of you online and those of you here in the room if there are questions. So when I was in grade 9 English, so that's here, I don't know what year that is, when you're 15, I was in grade 9 English, and I remember we were studying Macbeth. And I remember the teacher teaching us about a device called dramatic irony. So dramatic irony is when some characters perhaps know something, but not all the characters do, but the audience is in on it, right? So like horror films use this, right? Like when you're watching something, you're like, don't go there. Okay, that's the dramatic irony. So in Macbeth, it's used when Macbeth is at the banquet and he says, you know, he wishes that Banquo was there when Banquo is actually dead. And we as an audience know that. So why am I sharing this with you? I want to ask you to imagine yourself, and I'm going to imagine myself as well, walking along a path. And you're looking around you and you see the landscape. Perhaps it's beautiful, perhaps you know where you're going, but it's towards the end of the day. And as you're walking, the sun begins to set, but you're out in the wilderness. There's no city lights. So I don't know if you've ever been camping or out in the middle of the wilderness when it's the night and you have no artificial light. You know, have you ever had the feeling when you open your eyes and close your eyes and it's just as dark both ways? It's that kind of darkness. And as you're walking in the darkness, you begin to slow down because you don't even know where you are. And after a while, you sit down because you're tired and you think, maybe I'm not going to make it there anyway. So maybe I should just lie down and close my eyes. But here's the dramatic irony part, because as you lie down and close your eyes, the sun begins to rise. But you don't see it because you've gone to sleep, because you thought that's it, the darkness was permanent. Why am I asking you to imagine this? Because I think all of us can fall into this kind of trap, where when it gets dark or the gas tank gets low, we think, all right, whatever, gonna close my eyes, gonna give up, gonna try something new. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. But if we do that, we miss the light. And what I want to share with you, and very much share with myself, is the charge and the promise from the Almighty, I believe, that if we hold on, if we don't give up on the project, but we keep on going one step at a time, one day at a time, sometimes one moment at a time, normalizing, holding on, using our intellect, looking for novelty, then the light will come. And then all of the work, all of the struggle, all of the building will have been worth it. So I give us a bracha, I give us a blessing tonight that on our unique soul journeys, we should find our way and we should fill up those gas tanks and fill them up often is also my advice. So thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. I'm thinking I'm going to come sit next to you so we can take some questions. And we didn't report it right when we started, but I just wanted to say that tonight is actually dedicated to the Refuah Shalema to Moshe ben Miriam Rachamim, Rebecca Schenken's father, who needs a Refuah Shalema. So I just want to put that out there. And if anyone also has names of people that they want to, you can say those names, but we want to dedicate our learning of Torah to that employee. I want to thank you. Wow.
Yeah.
Very inspirational. So I'm hoping we have some questions. I'm glad to see we have cameras on. That's great. So you can either put your questions in the chat or you can unmute yourself, raise, and then we'll call on you to unmute yourself. And if I'll just start in the room here because we have quite a few women. Good to see. So are there any questions in the room? And then we'll move on. Anybody have any question? Well, you may think of questions. Okay, so any questions in the audience? Just put either wave your hand or put
put it in the chat.
You can put it in the chat, or you can
Yes, you have a question? Great. You don't have to put it in the chat. You can ask.
Okay, we've got a live question here. Okay, Karen, go ahead.
So you're talking about being disconnected, and I wanted to ask you to clarify, what do you mean being down or depressed, or do you mean you have a goal that you're not able to fulfill? What do you mean by being disconnected?
Yeah, yes, beautiful. That's a beautiful question. Thank you. So I think, you use the word depressed. So as a clinician, I'm always careful to differentiate between, a low mood that all of us experience or low motivation and a clinical diagnosis that perhaps requires a different kind of attention. So I'm not referring to that, although many of these strategies also can be very useful in that kind of work. But when I'm talking about feeling disconnected, in a spiritual journey, I think the two are very much connected, meaning when we are feeling disconnected, then from our soul purpose, from the things that enliven us, then I do think we feel down and then less able to reach our goals. So I'm not sure that they're two separate things, but rather one that feeds off the other. Does that make sense to you? If not, please ask me to clarify more.
Yeah. So I
Can you
think
repeat the questions, please?
Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
thank you.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
My question was, when I said disconnected, what did I mean? Did I mean not reaching a goal, or was I talking about like being depressed and down? And so my answer is that I think they're putting a clinical diagnosis of depression aside, but talking about sort of lower mood, lower motivation, and a harder time reaching a goal, that I think the two are quite connected to each other.
I think your talk presupposes that you have goals.
Mhm.
Is that sort of the first stage? Maybe, I don't know, but to formulate your goals and aspirations.
Yeah.
Yes, well, yes and no. So this is what I want to say is, I think that you need to have things that you are working on. But I think, and maybe it's different for those of you here, but my experience is that goals, and I do use goal setting in therapy and in my life, but that goals sometimes have, can feel very linear, right? Like I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to achieve that. And I want to just expand our notion of goals, that goals can also be like a mood, right? Or like a vignette. I learned this from a coach, Kayla Levin. She talks about, goal setting doesn't have to be like, I'm going to do all these things, but like goal setting could be, I imagine myself picking my kid up from school and being relaxed and having a snack ready, right? Or I imagine myself able to spend an hour walking without my phone and just my thoughts, right? Like that it doesn't have to be hard goals, I guess. And I think it's particularly important for women to cultivate some of these sort of, maybe talk about them as softer goals. And that's why I think it's important to notice that the piece that it's based on, Rev Wolbe's piece, uses love and hate, which is really like relationship words, right? And we're relationship builders. And if we get too goaly, like bring too much goal type energy to relationships, it doesn't actually nurture them, right? Like we need to be able to also sort of have like more organic goals, I guess is what I mean.
I'd like to interject
Yes,
that
please.
sometimes when we're making goals based on what other people are thinking, what people think that we should be doing. And we also often make goals because a different part of us is speaking. We might say, oh, I've got to wear more makeup, or that, we're looking at very external things, but we forget to look inside ourselves to see what is the who we are saying. And that's my definition for neshama, is the who we are, and that lives within this very holy vessel, our body. So we have to often really figure out what are we wanting? What do we want to do? And then the one we have to tell is ourself. We often make a goal, we tell others, we talk about it, but we don't actually let ourselves know what we want to do. So,
I think maybe one thing to think about, and I thank you for asking. I always love the questions that clarify, because to me, in my mind, right, like I know what I'm saying. This is good. Is maybe along with goals, we should talk about ratzon, desire, right? Like what's pulling me forward? What am I wanting in my life? What do I want to run towards?
beautiful. How do we get that inspiration injection? Just a little bit of it. Any questions from audience or Zoom audience? Narita.
Another question, but leading on from your question, is how does one identify what our ratzon is? Like how, if we're not even at that stage, how do we?
Okay, so the question is, I realized I didn't repeat, is how do we identify what our ratzon is?
Can you translate?
Oh, sorry, yes, our desire. So how do we how do we identify what our desire is? I think it's a deep question. I think one piece, and Rev Wolbe talks about this actually, is that we need to have time with ourselves and have conversations with ourselves, and that in our culture where we have, all this hyperconnectivity and so much going on, we don't have many opportunities just to get in touch with that. But that I think a lot of it comes through conversations with ourselves and being able to ask, like, what do I really want? Right? Like, what brings me peace? What brings me alive? Right? What are those vignettes that I would envision? And when I envision them, like, what are the ones that like make me think yes? Yeah. And also sometimes not doing it only on our own, having a friend and a mentor who we can explore that with.
No, I agree with you, but that conversation within is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need to speak to and try to get in touch with. And then it is good to, to have a mentor or to run it by friends, etc. Any more questions? I'll look here, you look there. Okay. Yeah. Happy to unmute people. People can ask questions. That's it. Okay, good. Okay, well, I want to thank you, Ilana. It was fabulous. Again, I want to make a shout out for Ilana's book, Choosing Up. Maybe I'll just show it here, which is available on Amazon. You can also go onto your website.
Yes, and the distributor in the UK is, hold on.
It says Feldheim Mosaica.
Yeah, but the UK distributor is, what's the UK
Lehman's.
Lehman. So it's on their website also. You can order it.
Okay, and most bookstores will have it. As I said, there are people from many, many different places in the UK, Europe, and beyond. So it's really exciting to have.
The bookstore's not going to know what's hit them tomorrow.
What's it about? Is it similar to what you've been talking about?
So it's a collection of stories. I actually wrote it over a number of years. I had a weekly email that I was sending out, and then they became the rough basis for an exploration of how in our own lives we can find meaning, growth, and God in our everyday experiences. So they're divided into chapters. There's love, there's resilience, there's hope, and then there are a number of stories that explore these concepts, and then there are guide questions. So people use it for book clubs, actually.
And we actually, you actually tied in this idea of choosing up, because as you said, Yosef went up and down, but a person has to be able to realize we are going to go down, but we have the opportunity to choose up. So thank you very, very much. Anyone interested in a book club? I don't know, that might be kind of a fun thing to do. Okay, so be in touch if you're interested. If you have ideas for our future spiritual spas or want to hear about the programs at Kesher, with my name, I've put an email, rsimon@kesher.org.uk, so you can be in touch, and you can just look up Kesher. And this will be, hopefully, at least part of it, will be on our YouTube channel, Jewish Wisdom for the Soul and Mind. So you can take a look in a few days. It will be going on that, we hope. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Narita, for hosting. And thank you everyone for coming on.